was just talking about things. It doesn't really matter.
He's definitely not asking about a thing that wasn't about the American Revolution, and because he was talking about the American Revolution. So he's probably asking about the thing that was the American Revolution, and not the thing that wasn't.
The American Revolution was quite good, and it introduced.
We should do it again.
We should.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah,
even better the second time around.
Yeah, dude. And we can replace the Star Spangled Banner with the Battle Cry of Freedom as the national anthem.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. I saw a clip of Zizek saying in conversation recently that I one of his better moments, you know how he can be like really dumb and annoying and stupid and liberal a lot of the times, but he was in defense of Stalinism. That was actually really, really great, where he was recounting, he was saying there's a myth, didn't really actually happen, but there's an anecdote about how in Stalin's USSR there was all of the inmates, the prisoners in the Gulag had to, it was something like send in like a birthday wishes and well regards for Stalin's birthday or whatever. And even though this didn't really happen, it's emblematic of what the project of the USSR actually was. This kind of a story is not possible or not imaginable. It's not a myth that would grow up out of Hitler's Germany, right? The project of Nazism was not one of universalism. The inmates of the concentration camp wouldn't, even in a mythological, idealized version of Nazi Germany, would not be sending birthday wishes and well regards to Hitler.
Right.
That is something that was happening in or a mythology that could be told about the USSR. And then he said at the end of this little recounting of this little narrative, he was like, and then I forget who said it. He mentioned the name of whoever it was. He said, like this person said, what we must do then is try again, fail again, fail better.
Samuel Beckett.
Yeah, Samuel Beckett.
Yeah, I mean, we actually talked about, not necessarily that anecdote, but I think at the end of the Enzo Traverso study group that we did, that was one of the things we talked about. The collectivist project, having like the gulags and the purges being sort of like something that you have to try to justify because it's such an aberration that gets so much against what the principles of communism actually are, as opposed to Nazism, which is just like, fucking definitely getting rid of a bunch of people that were physically, morally, racially inferior. That's part of the project. Hierarchy, definitely part of the project. Whereas the hierarchy and excess deaths that exist under Stalinism are something you either got to pretend didn't exist or try to explain away somehow as, so that there's enormous differences between the two different ideologies.
That's the whole socialism or barbarism in a nutshell. And that's something that the USSR shares with the United States. All of their gravest crimes are betrayals of their own mythical, standing in the universal imaginary.
Right. Whereas the Nazis' greatest crimes are enactments.
Yeah, exactly.
Of their program.
Of their program, exactly.
Yeah. Well, hello and welcome to the Regrettable Century. It's all of us, the dudes. We're all here to talk about the pink tide, its successes, its failures, its future, if it has one. Obviously, this is spurred on by recent events in Venezuela. And by recent events, I mean the war crimes committed by the Trump government against the sovereign nation of Venezuela and the kidnapping of their president on false charges of drug smuggling and breaking a law that only exists to keep gangsters in America from buying Tommy guns. Real wild shit. But as we discussed, if you've listened to our geopolitics episodes, the main thing that Nicolas Maduro was indicted for, they've already dropped that charge, which is being a member of some cartel that doesn't exist. But anyway, yeah, wild stuff going on in South America. But we figured it was a good time to talk about South America and the pink tide, South and Central America, I guess. Wait, no, all these are in South America. Yes, South America,
Central America as well, Latin America, just
Nicaragua,
I mean,
Central America.
everywhere south of the Rio Grande.
yes, you're right. Well, anyway, pink tide time.
Mexico is, should be part of the conversation right now,
Yeah, exactly.
It should be, but it wasn't in any of the articles we read.
Well, it's because Manuel Lopez Obrador kind of came after these. These were 2016,
Right.
2018s when they were written.
Right. Which there really should be more recent stuff on them. But I guess that's when you could really tell that the Bolivarian project specifically, but the rest of the pink tide projects had collapsed. Or were flagging to the point where it looked like they were going to collapse in 2016 to 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this kind of gets at I think one of the things I want to talk about, which is the what we call the pink tide merely having social democratic, left-leaning, sovereigntist governments, or is it something more? And like does the fact that AMLO and then Scheinbaum after him, since they are both left-wing presidents, does that make Mexico a pink tide country, or does the pink tide mean something more specific? And I kind of think it does, but I also think that I don't think that most people do.
I think it's related. I think the former doesn't come without the AMLO, and Scheinbaum doesn't come without preceded it.
Oh yeah, I think that's true.
But that doesn't mean it's
Sure.
a continuation of it. In many ways, Mexico has made different policy decisions, and one could argue that has made them more successful and more durable.
Yeah, I think that's true. Maybe the first thing we should talk about is just like, what is the pink tide? Because I imagine that it's very common knowledge to a certain generation, but I wonder if you said pink tide. I don't know a lot of 18-year-olds, so I don't know, but I imagine that super young people, this is not a in the zeitgeist in the same way as it was, 20 years ago.
I do know a lot of 18-year-olds. But I would hope the ones that would listen to our podcast are of the different caliber than the ones that I'm teaching in.
Ones who are not
core
functionally
classes.
illiterate.
Yes. Generally, most Marxists aren't functionally illiterate.
Yeah, generally speaking.
But it's only about 40% of them that are functionally illiterate, okay?
I'm sure there's some heroic, functionally illiterate.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Young people
that
out there.
read Marx at a 5th grade level. Yeah.
I
no,
I heard a story of a union organizer told one time that about one of the workers who was a chief organizer in the organizing project gave herself bruises on her arm so that she could remember her left from her right, because this was like a necessary part of how to remembering which candidate to vote for on the ballot. And that was like, she needed to like remember this very basic thing that most people learn when they're like in kindergarten or whatever, is left and right. And
Yeah.
she didn't know it. And so she was like giving herself a physical reminder of it. There's all kinds of incredible heroism among very poorly educated individuals.
Sure, yeah.
Well,
Man, I thought you were saying that like as like a symbolic reminder, like left and I have bruises here because I wanted to make sure that I have a symbolic reminder about which is the right side. This is the thing I believe. But you meant literally like I need to know which one is which.
labor penance.
Oh.
I feel like, well, there's also incredibly intelligent people who struggle with basic directionality.
No, absolutely.
Impairment. So it's not necessarily about education in that respect.
there are incredibly intelligent people that have been educated by our country's education system and have thus been utterly failed, and are, functionally illiterate as a result.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's nothing on this younger generation of kids. It's not their fault. It's definitely the parenting and the education system that has robbed them of the ability to function the way that adults in this country have functioned, in the past century.
Yeah, for sure. Disintegrating social institutions.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be interested to hear a definition of the pink tide, Jason, from your perspective, as you're the one who's raising the notion that it's more precise than perhaps in the imagination of most people who've even heard the term.
But before you do that in depth, what is it shorthand for? Because we have this pejorative history of pinko, and then pink tide is supposed to be like leftist, but non-communist, right?
Yeah.
That's like
the shorthand is just like there's a whole wave of decidedly left-wing governments in Latin America. That's it.
Okay.
I think it's much more. I guess I want to see if what I'm saying, what I'm feeling makes sense. So, in 1999, you get the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, and he's a moderate nationalist who's like wanting to use Venezuela's wealth for his own country. That's it. And he enacts some policies which are beneficial to Venezuela as opposed to American oil interests. So then he gets overthrown in a coup, and then in 2002, I think.
Yeah, it was 2002.
And then the population, especially of Caracas and especially of Barrio 23 Enero, which is like the largest poor neighborhood in Venezuela, they come to his rescue. Basically, they rally to demand the return of the president, and they threaten to shut the whole country down. They surround the palace at Miraflores, which is the Venezuelan equivalent of the White House, and they won't leave. It's like 2 million people. And then it turns out that the military coup was it wasn't universally supported all throughout the military. There were layers of the military which liked Chavez, so they brought him back. And then upon his return, Chavez becomes increasingly radical, so much so that he ends up like founding a new party, PSUV, which is a Partido Socialista Unidad de Venezuela. And
I have a PSUV soccer jersey that you got me in Venezuela still.
Oh, hell yeah.
That's awesome.
He starts talking about how we don't just need a left orientation. We don't just need to assert our sovereignty. We need to build socialism. But, we can't just build socialism in one country. And it can't build socialism of the old type, because the 20th century is a bunch of is a very regrettable series of heroic but ultimately failed attempts and whatever. So we need a socialism for the 21st century, but it's not going to be brand new. It's going to be based on our own history, because we have a history of like emancipatory national liberation movements and strivings toward democracy. So that's the hero is Simón Bolivar, in the same way that José Martí is the hero in Cuba. And he also talks about the need to found a fifth international to unite parties of a new type, to bring the socialism of the 21st century into fruition. In the wake of that, we also see a whole bunch of other countries starting to do the same thing. So you get like Evo Morales in Bolivia, and
Lula in Brazil, and Kirchner in Argentina.
Well, yeah, and I think that's when I guess the metaphor still kind of works, the pink tide, because this starts to wash over the whole continent, but it isn't all.
Yeah,
it's not all the same everywhere. Like,
no, Venezuela was certainly the most radical.
By far.
Movements. Yeah.
And Peronism, as embodied by Nestor Kirchner and whoever his successor was, I can't remember. Is it Cristina Fernandez Kirchner? Whatever.
His wife.
Is the most. There's not much to talk about, really. There's not much to say about it. It's like it's a slightly left wing government. Whereas
So
Venezuela
Peronism has like, oh, sorry.
well, yeah, just that Venezuela experienced a whole series of increasingly radical and popular and participatory moves that were inspiring to the whole global left. It inaugurated a whole new era. Whereas like in Paraguay and then Argentina, it was more like, yeah, we also have some lefty kind of stuff here as well. So it's like the wave was strongest in some places, and toward the top of the continent, but it did wash over the whole thing.
Venezuela is also incredibly tied to Cuba, more so than all the other economies, right?
For sure.
And it's important to mention Cuba is not included in the pink tide, obviously.
No, they're nice and red.
Nice and red.
Right.
Nice and red. Good solid shade of firehouse red.
And I think that distinction probably matters a lot.
Yeah.
Like Chavez said to Lula da Silva, I forget what year, but it was sometime in the early years. He said, "The problem with you, Lula, is that the CIA will never try to assassinate you."
Damn.
Basically being like, you're too moderate, you're too business friendly. And, obviously because we believe in sovereignty, we want you, we like you. But I think I agree with him, basically. That's a distinction I think I want to make, is that Chavez and Chavismo represents the spear tip, the vanguard of the pink tide. And then maybe Kirchner in Argentina represents barely, like vaguely, like it has some tinge of the pink tide, but like it's not a threat.
They call it
capital.
left. They call it, in one of the articles we read, left neoliberalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's super interesting just to talk about Peronism for a second.
Sure.
Because Peronism has a left wing and a right wing variant. The right wing variant of Peronism looks very similar to fascism, and the left wing version of Peronism looks very similar to social democracy, sort of like a more sort of authoritarian social democracy, but still democratic. Semi-authoritarian would probably be the better word for it. But like Peron was very influenced by the fascist the European fascist movements, and attempted to model his justicialism after them. And he didn't have anything explicitly racist like the Nazis did, but he was very sympathetic to the Nazis and allowed lots of Nazis to come to Argentina after the war. Did Peron was during the war? Yeah, right after the war. That was definitely Peron. But anyway, so like, it's kind of weird that you'll have the far right party and then the moderate sort of pink tide left party in Argentina, both claiming to be Peronist parties. And while Peronism was never like outright fascism, it definitely modeled itself on fascism, and it definitely had this sort of collectivist and corporatist aspects of fascism, with like the youth wing and the shirt movement and the like.
And it definitely had the cult of personality around the leader,
for sure,
the caudillismo. Like they would sing songs like Perón, Perón, you are first among workers.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the left Peronism is left corporatism, and right Peronism is right corporatism. But anyway, so yeah, that's the movement upon which left wing the leftist movements in Argentina are built. Even if you're like a socialist, you're still vaguely built off of this framework that was Peronism, unless of course you're like a communist or whatever.
I think that makes sense too, though. Like that shows the corporatism and populism. They're these things which are like very nebulous. They can be defined by whichever side takes the helm.
Yeah,
But they're not necessarily just like one thing or the other.
And one of the differences between corporatism and something approaching socialism would be the sorts of coalitions that make up its backbone, right?
Yes.
And I think that gets to like the differences of these different nation states in the Pink Tide is like what sorts of coalitions make up each country's backbone. What is even possible or feasible in the realpolitik of Lula's Brazil versus Chavez's Venezuela.
Yeah.
But also, like, I was thinking this when you were talking earlier about the coup, Jason, and it made me think, okay, so Venezuela mobilized kind of a social base from the bottom up in neighborhoods and so forth in a way that other countries did not or could not. I think of other coups that did not, the populations were not ready to mobilize in the same way. For instance, with Aristide in Haiti or later with Zelaya in Honduras, they were not able to achieve what Venezuelans were. And that's pretty notable. It's like kind of the proof is in the pudding of how they showed up following the attempted coup.
Yeah, I think that turns out to more or less, let's say it puts some teeth behind this division. That in Venezuela, you have a political project, which is we are going to not only fix the country, but also inspire other people. And in other places, it was more like, I'm going to fix the country. So like in Venezuela, you, I remember like going out to a bar after May Day with members of Montaraz, which I don't know if it still exists. It was a popular militia. Their uniform was, like very Castro looking, because of course it was. And they had a big red star on the cap, and then everybody had an AK-47. I was like, but because this is before the Bolivarian militias, which also, it's a different thing that I think it's. I don't want to say it's unique because I don't think I know enough about Latin America, but certainly sort of the exception. But the Bolivarian militias were like this mass they still are this mass organization. But like in 2010, I think I went in 2010, and when I was at the bar, there was like these guys. Like this guy was he was an engineer of some kind, and the next guy was like a bus driver. On their off days or whatever, they had some kind of schedule that was they had to put in some time in the local militia, and they were basically a popular attempt to not rely exclusively on the armed forces, because the armed forces were, it's like, well, who knows what these people are going to do? They did overthrow the president, although they also did come join us to help bring him back. But from now on, there was this notion that like the people have to be armed and self-organized, and they
still are.
I mean it's a big part of why all this saber rattling about Venezuela is even today, even at this stage, which is not at all like the Chavez years, but it's even then it's like there's still some reverberation of that.
It's the reason Machado is not the president of Venezuela right now. It's the reason that the U.S. government went there and took out Maduro and then said, we can't just install our guy or gal in his place. We don't have the capacity to install this over and above a self-organized proletariat that acts in peasantry. In fact, this is a unique thing about Venezuela that I've read about in a monthly review anyway. I don't have the personal experience the way that living there for a time and visiting that you have, Jason, but that is a distinct feature of a 21st century socialism is the construction of socialism on the model of the commune, rather than on the model of the industrial proletariat, strictly speaking. So it's
and very consciously,
yeah,
it's very consciously in that way.
It's yes, exactly, and so it's communalism rather than proletarianism. In a sense, and I think you can find this in Marx, only marginally so, but you can find it there when he when he wrote that letter, responding to somebody talking about, well, what about in Russia? Can't we build communism out of the Russian peasant villages that are egalitarian? Couldn't we construct communism out of this? And he went. We have several drafts of his letter in response. And what he ultimately settled on, it was basically, yeah, maybe if it's actually connected in with a global communism that's led by the industrial proletariat, this could be part of how communism builds out from there.
And that was Vera
Engels elaborates
Zasulich.
on that and says the same thing. Marx was responding to Vera Zasulich, and then later in an introduction to the Communist Manifesto in Russian, Engels reiterates Marx's thoughts on it. So it's, the two big beards have endorsed communalism.
Well, also the Paris Commune, they endorsed it there.
Well, kind of.
Also that.
That's why Marx gets the idea that you have to smash and rebuild the state from the Paris Commune. You can't just, have a commune and hope that it survives the onslaught of the state, right?
Yeah, and incidentally, that's one of my, I think the lessons, one of my criticisms of the Pink Tide is that Chavez got elected in 1999, and then he dies of cancer, and he's replaced by Nicolas Maduro in was it 2013, 2014?
Dies of CIA cancer.
Right. It's 2026. It's 2026, and it's still possible. It's still theoretically conceivable that these not socialist parties can win an election. And of course, they don't, which is why the U.S. has to do special ops to arrest Maduro. But also, the same thing in Bolivia, the Morales government they make massive, extraordinary leaps in development, and the country is even regarded highly by people who do not regard the project itself highly, because they lift millions out of poverty, they increase literacy rate, they build a better infrastructure, they make it easier to extract natural resources and so on, and it's really difficult from any objective position, even by economists, to levy much of a criticism. But then the Constitution doesn't allow for Morales to run again, and so he was just not allowed to, just kept from doing so. And then the it's MAS. They have a kind of an internal sort of power struggle, and then MAS ends up losing the election, and now they have a center-right president. Even after what I forget I don't know the year that Morales wins the presidency, but even after all this time, the bourgeois state is still intact enough to be we use our old bourgeois constitution and bar you from running, so you can't be like a Castro figure. And that also brings up the second my second criticism, which is how is it that after all this time there's no secondary figure? How is it that you get Maduro after Chavez, or after Morales you get no one? And so those are the two big questions to me. Is I guess I could say it seems to me 21st century socialism is not enough like 20th century socialism. At least in that regard.
Right. The failure of the capacity to self-replicate, to reproduce and sustain itself beyond its initial initial foundation or formation. Yeah. That is
Yeah,
definitely
like
my biggest question about it is, man, it across the continent, it really collapsed in on itself. We've got far right governments that have come into place after them and have, even gotten reelected over and over again. And yes, look, I'm well aware of the ML response to this is because it's because of U.S. intervention in the elections and neocolonialism and sanctions and whatever else. And yes, that is true. That is a component of it. But the fact remains that only gets us so far into an explanation. The U.S. actions and threat of actions and the U.S. carrots and sticks intervention into these countries could only get us so far. I think if you go and talk to the population that's not voting for or is not voting for the successors of the pink tide and is voting for the reaction, I think you're going to find a lot of people who recognize that there's a lack of proof of concept. That is discouraging in trying to pursue this any further. Mm-hmm. If we're going to bring the masses on board to any kind of project such as this, we've got to be able to convincingly argue that even though and despite the U.S.'s attempted influence on our journey, on our projects, this is worth doing. This is a road worth taking. And if regular working people see that no, this isn't a road worth taking, even if it were a good idea, it's not going to work out well for me and my community and my family and friends because I've seen what happens. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you get around that. I don't know how we get past that. The other reality is in Venezuela, yes, it is subject to devastating sanctions that isolate it from the international economy, and this is immiserating and causes poverty and lack of fruitful development. However, there is also mismanagement and corruption.
Yeah.
That does exist. It is part of, the failures of the project, and we've got to look at it, learn from it, and not just say, "Oh, yeah, well, they did it wrong, and we'll do it right." We need to be able to be really specific about what are we going to do differently to make sure that we don't replicate, our own shooting ourselves in the foot as we try to march toward socialism.
Yeah, because actually that's really well put. The special period in Cuba after the USSR, after the end of the Cold War, whenever it's only the world market, it's only global trade, and that's it. There's no you don't have any real partners, and so everything gets all fucked up. You see all the waves of I was gonna say boat people, but that means something different. That's like in a reference to Vietnam. The waves of people leaving in the 90s to come to the U.S. The Elian Gonzalez kind of background.
Yeah.
But the problem of the global order and the reliance on things like internet, like the fact that sanctions can work, was also a problem going all the way back to part of the reason why Ceausescu's government was so unpopular. It's not just because it was repressive, because obviously, yes, it was, but also because Romania was trying to pay back IMF loans.
Right.
So they were trying to, it was an austerian government and also a repressive government.
Mm-hmm.
So big part of what was wrong with the economic stagnation in the Brezhnev years of the USSR was that there's a global economic downturn,
Right.
in during those same years. And so, like, at a certain point, this issue of global markets is going to be an issue. It's going to be a problem, and you have to address it as more than just wanting commodity stability. Because, as long as the oil market was high, then the Venezuelan government had lots and lots of money for their various programs and for a whole bunch of really extraordinary things, not just like pension reforms, but I mean like the way that Bolivarianism manifested at the popular level was extraordinary. But the reason why there was so much enthusiasm for things like seizing a factory and turning it over to the workers, or for the workers seizing a factory rather and turning it over to themselves, and seizing vacant buildings from the absentee landlords who live in fucking Miami and turning it into a housing cooperative. The reason why that energy existed, the reason why that was conceived of, was because the Bolivarian government could also fund, natural gas, free natural gas canisters replacements, and they could do free medical care because they could pay to fund and house and build things and staff it with Cuban doctors and so on, because of the price of oil at the global level. But when the U.S. sanctions your country and then the oil markets drop a little bit, you've got to have something else.
Yeah.
And I feel like the criticism, it was like at a certain point you have to move beyond, even if it's comfortable to not move beyond. It's like Saint-Just said, those who make only half a revolution dig their own grave. Of course, that's easy to say, from Texas in 2026. But I just think
that's why we should say it.
That's exactly why we should say it.
Us. It doesn't make it less true just because it's easy.
Yeah.
I will not give that up to the fucking tankies.
No, of course not. Like a few years back, Morales could have, I don't want to say he should have, but I do think he should have, but he could have just been like, oh, well, I am barred from running again by your bourgeois constitution, which is does not serve the interests of the Bolivian people. And so I'm just going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
And, especially if Lula was more like Chavez, then, we can have a regional, that Mercosur, the ALBA could be more like a left-wing socialist EU. And we could rely on the enormous wealth of our countries rather than the financial wealth of, New York and London and Brussels. So I guess that's at a certain point, you have to just, it seems as though you just have to go, you have to keep moving. That the revolution has to be made, I don't know, like permanent.
Yeah, I mean, I remember getting yelled at. I was probably a bit. So I remember when oil prices changed. That was a big reason for Venezuela's downturn. Was oil prices were really high for a period of time, and that was really good for them. And then oil prices went down. Because of choices that OPEC made that were not at the direction of the United States. And that was really bad for them. And I remember back then, at that time, I was probably a lot more naively, third campus in my general sensibilities, unfortunately. So I made some very easy, offhanded, flippant sort of criticisms of, they did things wrong. Of course, this is the problem. But, one of the things that I was noting at the time, I remember, Yeah, well, I mean, this is a problem with not diversifying your economy.
Yes.
If your entire political project is predicated on one single commodity, no matter how important that commodity is, it's going to be subject to the very vagaries of the market around that commodity, and those that can change. Your fortunes can change depending on what happens with that one commodity. You've got to diversify your portfolio, to use some very bourgeois language around it, or else this whole thing is not going to work. I remember getting castigated by that one anyway, an ML guy, a Stalinist guy that we all knew back then, for daring to criticize Venezuela at that moment. Frankly, he was probably partly right. Yeah, exactly. He was probably at least partially right in that time, in that place. I was probably being very in the tradition of the third campus, lending a hand to imperialism. Nonetheless, the criticism itself, I think, stands. If we want our projects to be successful, we've got to go farther than nationalizing one single industry. You've got to be able to take hold of the entirety of the productive capacity of your nation, at its foundations across commodities.
And that's the point.
And I remember. Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ben.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm refusing to.
I mean, we'll get into this article you shared with us that goes pretty deeply into basically how this article from Jacobin from 2016, which is super insightful. Kyla Sankey in Britain basically says Venezuela social transformation was limited to the political sphere. It took place at the local level, but had no foundation in the productive base of the economy, she says.
Right.
But with regard to this notion of third campism that you bring up, that part of Tenke's argument is always partially true. It's just that it's not the whole picture, and it can't answer every iteration of the problem. Like, I feel like spiritually, my third campism remains a vital part of my politics, but it's just that there is no third camp independent of the second. And it's always under the umbrella, and there is always a definitive choice to be made at a certain point. It doesn't remain this floating position in and of itself.
Yeah, and like I think about how I forget where it was. It was on one of the tributaries to the Orinoco River. But I attended a session of it was kind of like I'll call it a press conference of a self-administered petroleum facility where the union had demanded that they would have management training courses that they could conduct in the evenings after work. The point of doing this was to eventually, they said to essentially adopt. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I feel like I remember him saying Yugoslav style, like self-management. It's not autogestion in the way that people in Argentina talked about, like worker owned, worker run, but because the nationalized firms, it was state run because it's very it's of the national interest, but managed by the workforce in this kind of partnership. It's not like it's not our enterprise, but we run it because we work here. And I remember just being so inspired by that. And one of the guys said, what we want to build a socialism like what Karl Marx talked about, not socialism the way that it's commonly understood, like in the way that's popular in like the news media, whatever. And I remember just thinking that was like so extremely, it was wonderful, it was extraordinary. But that was also only possible because of the price of oil at the time.
Right.
And then, there were similar things like that. Like there were local news channels, and there's a brick factory, which was it's funny the way that the workers end up getting control of the factory is the owner was Brazilian, and so they just like locked him in a closet and said, "We won't let you leave, and you can't go back to Brazil until you sign over the company to us." And he was like, "You know what? Fuck this! I'm just going to go back to my country." So they slid him a contract under the door, and he signed it, and then he left. And he was like, I could probably just challenge this in court because I was very obviously under
Duress.
Duress, yeah. But the Venezuelan courts were like, well, we're socialists, so you signed this contract. The workers now own it, and that's
From
the way
above
that,
and below.
exactly.
That's right.
Yes.
That's why That's when the first major, let's call it a chink in my third campus armor started to go away. And was like, oh, we elected a socialist government, and they make it possible legally to defend the republic by stealing and transforming productive property, making the republic make more sense by virtue of making it socialist. But anyways, all of that was only possible because it started with the election of a president and the adoption of a very tepid at first, very moderate sovereigntist moves with the reliance on the oil commodity in the global markets. At a certain point, it had to become better and more varied and much more sophisticated, and it did. But then, of course, once Chavez died, apparently that was just enough. So, yeah, it's really hard to find there's no clean lesson here. It's just, a lot of people, especially comrades at the time, would say things like, well, that's why you can't, legislate socialism or whatever. I think that you can and should use the democratic process. This is what Kevin was saying in our Patreon Q&A. You should use it.
This is what Lenin said. I would remind all of those poo-pooers.
Yes, but the way that you use it...
More importantly, it's what I said.
Yes, indeed.
And this is where I adopt an attitude, which is, an idealist attitude, whatever. I don't care. Like the fact that when Chavez was president, his ethical sensibilities really did impact and affect how things were done.
Yeah.
And you can't deny that. It really does matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
I'd like, if we could, because Kevin brought it up, remembering sort of like before he was pounced upon by the Stalinists back in the day, about kind of seeing down the pipeline that this basically everything is premised on oil production. And then, as you said, Jason, this neo-developmentalism model that Kyla Senki goes into 10 years ago. I guess this is our 2016 memory is reading this. Basically, she says, subsidies to business owners failed to promote investment in ways that could support the goals of national development or economic diversification, is what Kevin was saying. And throughout the pink tide countries, including Venezuela, structural economic imbalances persisted, leading these countries to depend ever more on raw material exports to fuel economic growth and fund social welfare programs. So they can withstand sanctions from the U.S. So long as the oil prices are continuing.
Right.
Once those fall, that is also, we could look at Russia. We could look at other countries upon whom sanctions programs have been enacted that have withstood them because of the economy, because of the global market, and particularly because of China, right? But another part of why all of this befalls Venezuela is because China goes through a slowing, right? They go through a period of transition where their growth slows down, and that affects the entirety of the pink tide countries, which creates just total vulnerability to U.S. sanctions. And this author, Stenke, is saying that this has to do with not diversifying their economies. So I would welcome going into this part of this article by Kyla Stanky from 2016 and Jacobin, What Happened to the Pink Tide, this neo-developmentalism critique.
I mean, I think that we should, because I'm basically just like shooting from the hip randomly.
You're
like,
doing
this
a
is the
great
thing
job.
I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But I think it's like this is basically, it isn't really, I think, about ideological messaging per se, or which of the countries has handled it better. I think this is the underlying crux of why the pink tide became whatever it is today.
Do you want to like read it, or like?
Well, I
how
can
do you
read
go
passages that have stood out to me. I did read a bit. The reprimarization of economies has further restricted their productive base and locked them into a path of dependency on raw material exports. So no matter that Venezuela has the largest untapped oil reserves in the world, so long as the relations in the global economy remain as such, their dependence of either the West or China, right? So it doesn't really matter what kind of wealth you're sitting on. If your relationship in the global market remains as is, you're a dependent. And therefore your entire project, whether it's the radical one in Venezuela or the more milquetoast social democratic ones to the south, remains in a dependent relationship to the other world powers.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess I can't quite decide on how much. Like, I don't like. Okay, but given that what you said is true, I agree entirely with what you said, and I think with this article. Well, no, I guess it's still the case that the example to hold up as the alternative, as the model, as the opposite of everything that's happened, is Cuba.
Yeah,
Cuba has withstood so much for so long, and I think that actually I put that in the outline. That no one has been quite Cuba enough.
well,
That's my criticism of, like in Greece, whenever Tsipras was like afraid of being boxed out of the European Economic Community. I was like, why?
Like Cuba?
Yeah, just be like Cuba.
I mean, I will say Cuba's fate is very vulnerable right now, based upon
that's true.
based upon the recent strike in Venezuela and other events. So Cuba is not.
It is and it isn't.
It is and it isn't, but it's not immune from the thing we're examining here.
You're right.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Cuba is not reliant on Russia, but Russia is a powerful ally that sees Cuba as a red line and it will hold the United States to the treaty that it signed with the United States over the Bay of Pigs invasion. And Cuba has a lot more goodwill in the rest of the world than Venezuela does.
Sure, of course.
Particularly because they're not sitting on anyone's oil.
Sure.
Yes, but
right.
They do have domestic strife. The collapse of the Soviet Union was devastating for the economy of Cuba, and it has never even come anywhere close to recovering. And
that's true.
If the U.S. is able to carve the relationship that it has, of Venezuela off of the relationship that it has with Cuba, that will hurt it even more. And because of the people of Cuba, no matter how much they love their own beautiful history and are committed to the project, the reality is, if they continue to be for lifetimes, for generations at one after another, continue to be immiserated and live in total misery, at some point people will simply say, this isn't worth it.
And
this isn't worth it.
That.
And let's
That's
not
true.
forget.
I just meant for now.
Sure, but
and since the Maduro was taken out of power, U.S. officials and the economic elite that they serve have been openly and publicly salivating about the collapse of the Cuban regime.
That's true.
That has become ever so more viable, realistic since
that's my
invasion
point.
Of Venezuela.
They're not as vulnerable as Venezuela. Is all I'm saying. I'm not saying that that efforts are not going to be made, just that they're not as vulnerable.
Well, the recent
they are vulnerable.
The new Donroe doctrine or whatever is premised on an embrace of multipolarity, and Russia has a corresponding interest in just such an embrace of multipolarity from their sphere of influence. So
it's true.
There are lots of larger questions, and Cuba is by no means secure in any way, and that's been the case forever. But even more so today. And
so,
yeah, so there is a kind of domino theory in play based upon interdependency. And this article is getting into like how the dependence upon trade with China or agreements with Russia or so on reinforce commodity export-led growth. And that is the underlying weakness that isn't really we can return to criticisms based on politics, but underneath that is this, right? And Stenke is arguing that that this is based on an extractivist model, which basically retards or creates a stop in the possibility of building the alternative economic and political structures that these countries need.
Stanky actually goes as far as to say that it's prevented the possibility of any further developments in this direction. And
but just before I
agree.
I agree
right.
completely. But I was talking to Chris before we started recording, and it's like I also at the same time am hard pressed to think of an alternative path for basically the initial salvo that Chavez and others enacted. You know, the means by which they were even able to achieve that was by harnessing the independence from extractivist energy power plays on the world market.
Well, I do think that this is one area where I think that 20th century socialism had a leg up on 21st century socialism. What I mean there is that China is not the Soviet Union and doesn't want to be, and I think it's to some degree there is a detriment to the project of socialism outside of China.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan is going to be a friendly country for China, no matter what. And that's in some ways that's good, obviously, but also like, what do you think would happen if there was a Soviet style support for consciously, objectively socialist countries? I don't know, because we don't live in that world.
Okay, so I need to say something before we get way too far off of this point, but I haven't been able to make this point yet. Talking about Russia and multipolarity and, the idea that Russia might be willing to give up interests in the Western Hemisphere for hegemony in its own. I don't doubt that at some point Russia might agree to a deal like that with the United States, but not before NATO gets out of Finland, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Turkey, Hungary, Romania. There are reasons why Russia would cling to Cuba as a foothold in the Western Hemisphere, because NATO is not going to stop encroaching on Russia. But anyway, that's a point I wanted to make real quick in response to Ben, but haven't been able to get a word in.
Sorry.
But that actually ties in quite nicely to what we're talking about with the USSR. The USSR for better or for worse, not for better or for worse, for altruistic or otherwise reasons, funded challenges to U.S. hegemony all over the world. Cuba was one of those. And I think that it is true that China doesn't play that role, but to a certain extent, it does. And it's not like they're funding like socialist causes all over the world in order to create world revolution. No, they're funding infrastructure projects to create loyalty,
that's true.
and to create markets to sell to and to extract from. So it is a much more, it's sort of like trying to globalize the extractivist economy that they have going in their country. And I think that Russia does the same thing. Like Russia has, I think, helped recently in Iran with stopping the protests by helping shut down the Elon Musk's Skylink. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Starlink.
Starlink, by helping shut down Starlink. They're pretty sure that was Russia that helped Iran shut that down, so that the cells that were collaborating with the Mossad and the CIA weren't able to coordinate their assaults on the government. And that we're actually going to get into that in a lot more detail on our geopolitics episode. And I'm not saying that this was a purely IDF and CIA led uprising, but it was.
I mean, not purely,
but it was certainly taken over by it once it started, right?
I mean,
it doesn't
according
mean there aren't
to,
legitimate grievances, and that
Yeah.
I don't support the workers' councils of the Iranian Revolution Part 2 whenever that happens. But like what happened recently and everything else is directly a result of CIA and Mossad meddling.
Yeah. I mean, it's a window into the varieties of every color revolution, although I think this is maybe more complex than a lot of the ones that we've been watching in our political lifetimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Incidentally, I do think we should just do a color revolutions discussion sometime soon, because I feel like that's
absolutely.
It's a term that I think people use in this very wooden way, where like, oh, that means that's bad, or
Right.
or whatever. Like the Egyptian revolution, was that a color revolution? I don't know. It's there's a lot to it.
Yeah, we should do it and kind of have a what do you call it, a chart of which ones are most egregiously CIA versus which ones have.
Hell, I love making a chart.
Yep.
Stinky holds up Alba as like an example of where a sort of fifth international or a 21st century socialism that is doing more than just putting all its chips on the how does she put it, the raw material export based economy. And I like that ideologically, like I was saying, but okay, not to be didactic, but what is the world power? We can argue whether or not it's socialism that is still around on the world stage. It's China. So China has gone all in on extractivist economics. Granted, China and Venezuela are very different actors, but I don't really see a way around. Obviously, extractivism, in her words, increases government's vulnerability to boom-bust cycles. I don't see a way around it. So it seems like you have to have, that has to be part of it. It's just that that's all of it, especially in the global South. You're especially vulnerable to dependency. So do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I think I agree with you. I think that just raises another question, which is like, so given that, what should we think about the role of the global North? And it's still just, it does seem to be that no matter what else, it is just still the case that something like what we would call anti-imperialism or whatever, some kind of this you've got to break the stranglehold that the United States has on what happens with everybody everywhere. It's really tough because I don't want to say like, oh, here's what we should do or here's what we even should think. I just think that that much is very clear that like there's only so much that can be done.
Yeah.
In Venezuela and in Bolivia and in Ecuador, which is again another during the years of Rafael Correa, Ecuador was very much on the move and making huge strides, and then again it's just turned to a little bit to the right. It's turned even a lot to the right. But also even of China, like if ever we want to see China becoming what it's talking about trying to become or whatever, it's like it is just still the case that the United States plays this outsized role of dictating what happens in the world.
Right, which, I mean, unfortunately, something that the Tankies are right about is that the United States is still the biggest impediment to socialism or progress in general in the world, and that a defeat for American imperialism is a win for the global proletariat.
That's exactly what. Yeah, exactly.
It's the primary contradiction.
Yeah,
exactly. Projects like Chavismo in Venezuela will have a better chance at getting their legs under them outside of without having the U.S.'s boot on its neck, or capable of putting its boot on its neck as much. If we have a multipolar world, if projects like what happened in Venezuela have a different pole to turn to when it's sanctioned by this one pole, it's no longer a singular unilateral death blow.
Right?
And
exactly.
If Chavez hadn't been killed by CIA cancer, then
who knows?
Who knows? Maybe he could have seen through the construction of a Fifth International that could have functioned like an entrenchment of diplomatic relations between nations, a trade alliance formation, and a mutual military protection agreement that is like a Warsaw Pact sort of agreement. And if all of those could come together under the banner of building socialism in the 21st, I guess, in the 21st century, maybe that could emerge as a new pole in the world that we could actually, instead of just sitting around diddling our thumbs all day about what we dream were about being in the future, or we wish were the case in the world now, we could actually concretely, materially throw ourselves into the construction of an actually existing socialism.
Рабочие и крестьяне не смогут прожить без нас некому будет установить порядок, определить работу, тянуть труду. Без нас все развалится и государство распадется.